On a quiet day during a routine patrol, President Donald Trump unexpectedly finds a small, helpless puppy alone and abandoned. In a moment that surprises everyone, the powerful leader chooses to take the puppy in and give it a loving home. See how one heartwarming decision shows that even the most powerful people need love and companionship, just like the rest of us. It was a crisp morning in Los Angeles. The sun had just risen, casting a soft glow over the city's sprawling streets. The usual hum of traffic filled the air as people went about their business. Office workers hustling to their jobs, tourists snapping pictures of the city's famous landmarks. But today, something unusual was about to happen on the quiet streets of Hobart Boulevard. Donald Trump, now the newly re-elected president of the United States, was not where you'd expect to see him. He wasn't in the White House, or on a private jet, or even surrounded by his usual team of bodyguards and advisors. No, today he was on the streets of Los Angeles, away from the limelight, just like any other person. His mission was simple: to get a break from the madness of politics and reconnect with the world on a more personal level. Trump's decision to patrol the streets of Los Angeles had nothing to do with politics. It was a rare moment when he wanted to feel like a regular person again, just a man in his thoughts. He had seen enough of the corruption, the backstabbing, and the drama of the political world. But what he didn't expect on that morning was to be drawn into something much bigger than himself. As he walked along the sidewalk, his mind was elsewhere. He thought about his victory in the 2024 election and the challenges ahead. His victory had been hard-fought, filled with drama, controversy, and the kind of headlines that made him a target for many. Yet here in the bustling streets of LA, he could finally take a breath without the weight of the world on his shoulders. Suddenly, Trump stopped. His sharp eyes noticed something strange. A small, scruffy dog, brown fur, eyes wide with innocence, was following him, trotting behind as if drawn by some invisible force. Trump raised an eyebrow, pausing to glance at the little creature. It wasn't unusual for dogs to roam the streets of LA, but this one seemed different. It wasn't the typical stray. There was something about the way it walked, with a sense of purpose. It wasn't begging for food or chasing after something. No, it was just following. He turned to look at the dog more closely. It was a small puppy, no more than a few months old. Its tail wagged tentatively, and it let out a soft bark as if trying to get Trump's attention. "Hey there," Trump muttered, crouching down to get a better look at the pup. "You lost, little guy?" The dog stared up at him, its eyes full of curiosity. Trump noticed the collar. It wasn't a cheap one, but it was worn, faded with age. Whoever the dog belonged to had either abandoned it or simply forgotten about it. Trump's dilemma. The strange feeling that gripped Trump wasn't just because of the dog's sudden appearance. There was something almost symbolic about it. The dog wasn't just a stray, it was a reflection of Trump himself, lost, searching, and trying to find a place in a world that often felt cold and indifferent. As the dog sat by his feet, Trump couldn't help but feel a pull in his heart. It was a feeling he hadn't had in a long time. Sure, he had the loyalty of his supporters, the political backing, and the spotlight. But moments like these in the quiet of the streets made him wonder if he had lost something important along the way. He scratched the dog's head, his fingers brushing through its soft fur. "I don't know, buddy," Trump said, talking to the dog as if it could understand him. "You and me, we might just be in the same boat." In that moment, a decision began to form in his mind. Maybe he wasn't the one who had all the answers. Maybe this dog had something to teach him. Trump didn't know why he felt the urge to protect this small, vulnerable creature, but he did. Maybe it was because, after all the betrayals and challenges he had faced, he needed something to remind him of loyalty. Maybe, just maybe, this dog could be that reminder. The meeting of two souls. As if to seal the unspoken bond between them, the dog gave a small bark and nuzzled against Trump's leg. It was as though the animal knew exactly who it was dealing with. Trump's hands instinctively moved to pet the dog again, and for the first time in months, he allowed himself to relax. The quiet moment didn't last long, though. Trump's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps approaching. He glanced up to see Officer Mercado, a member of the Los Angeles Police Department, walking toward him. Trump had met many people in his life, but this officer was no ordinary figure. Mercado had a reputation, sharp, no nonsense, and with a keen sense for danger. He had been one of the officers on the force during Trump's visit to LA, and there was something about him that intrigued the president. Officer Mercado's eyes flicked to the dog, then to Trump, who stood up slowly. "You okay, sir?" Officer Mercado asked, his voice calm but with a hint of concern. It wasn't often that the President of the United States was seen walking around in public, and even less often did a cop find him alone. Trump smiled, albeit slightly. "Yeah, just taking a break." His gaze shifted back to the puppy at his feet. "Seems like I've made a new friend." Mercado raised an eyebrow, taking a step closer to the dog. "Is it yours?" Trump shook his head. "No idea. It just started following me." He paused for a moment, considering his next words carefully. "I've been looking for a companion lately, someone I can trust." The officer looked back at Trump, sensing the weight of the words. He had heard the rumors, the whispers about Trump's lonely existence, the challenges of leadership that weighed heavily on his shoulders. And now, here he was, talking about a dog like it was the answer to something deeper. "I don't know if a dog can fill that role, Mr. President," Officer Mercado said with a chuckle. "But I'll tell you what, I've seen plenty of loyal dogs in my time on the force." Trump's eyes lit up at the comment. "Loyalty," he murmured. It was a word that struck a chord. He looked down at the puppy again, who was now sitting attentively at his feet, its tail still wagging. For the first time in years, Trump felt a spark of hope. Maybe this dog, this little creature, was exactly what he needed. The decision. By now, Trump had made his decision. He would take the dog with him, bring it into his life, and protect it just as he had always tried to protect the American people. It felt right. It felt like a small victory in a world that often seemed full of setbacks. "Officer, do you mind if I take this little guy with me?" Trump asked. Mercado glanced at the dog, then back at Trump. There was something about the way the president asked that made him pause. Maybe it was because, for once, Trump wasn't asking for power or praise. He was asking for something simpler. Mercado nodded, a small smile forming. "I don't think anyone will mind." And with that, Trump, the President of the United States, left the streets of Los Angeles with the smallest companion by his side, his heart lightened by the bond he had just formed. What started as an ordinary walk turned into the beginning of an extraordinary journey, one that would change both Trump and the dog, Hobart, in ways neither of them could have ever imagined. As they walked together through the streets of Los Angeles, the world around them felt a little less chaotic. Trump, for the first time in years, allowed himself to forget the weight of the presidency, even if just for a moment. The constant flashing cameras, the angry protesters, the never-ending debates, they were all distant memories now. In this brief moment, it was just him and Hobart, two unlikely companions finding solace in each other's company. Hobart, with his big brown eyes and eager steps, followed Trump everywhere, like a shadow that never left. They quickly became inseparable, and in a city as bustling and diverse as Los Angeles, the two made quite an impression. It wasn't long before people started recognizing the former president walking his dog, and the sight of them became a sensation in the city. The media, ever hungry for a story, latched onto the unexpected pairing of Donald Trump and his new furry companion. News outlets speculated about the dog's origins, about whether the president had really found a new best friend in Hobart. Social media exploded with photos and videos of the duo, and a hashtag began trending. #Trump and Hobart. Some joked that Hobart might even run for office one day, while others admired the softer, more relatable side of Trump that they rarely saw in the public eye. But amidst all the buzz, something deeper was happening. Trump began to notice a change in himself. He had always been driven, focused on the next battle, the next victory, the next challenge. But now with Hobart by his side, Trump felt a sense of responsibility that went beyond politics. It was a quiet kind of responsibility, not for the country or his supporters, but for this small creature who depended on him for everything: food, shelter, affection. Hobart, too, seemed to sense the change in Trump. The dog, once timid and unsure of its place in the world, had found comfort in the security Trump offered. His once hesitant steps turned into confident strides, as if the dog now knew that he had found a home, a real home, with someone who cared for him. It was on a quiet afternoon as the two wandered through a park near Trump's hotel in LA that Trump found himself deep in thought. The world around him was peaceful, and for once, he didn't have to worry about the next scandal or the next political move. His phone buzzed in his pocket, an email from his advisors, a text from his campaign team. But Trump ignored it. This time, the noise of the outside world wasn't going to take away from the moment he had with Hobart. Sitting on a bench beneath a large oak tree, Trump looked down at Hobart, who was lying at his feet, his head resting on his paws. The dog had grown more comfortable around him, trusting him completely. Trump couldn't help but smile. The simplicity of the moment reminded him of something he hadn't felt in years. Peace. "I've been fighting battles my whole life," Trump said aloud, speaking to Hobart as if the dog could understand him. "Fighting for respect, fighting for power, fighting for success. But now I've got someone who just wants to be with me for who I am. No strings attached." He sighed deeply, the weight of his words sinking in. Maybe that's what I needed all along. Someone to remind me what really matters. As Trump sat on that bench, taking in the quiet and reflecting on his unexpected bond with Hobart, his phone buzzed again. This time it was different. A notification from the White House flashed on the screen. It was an urgent message from Mike Pence, his vice president. Trump's demeanor shifted. He wasn't the man who could simply drop everything for a moment of peace. "Mr. President, we need you back in Washington. There's a situation developing. It's bigger than we anticipated," the message read. Trump hesitated. He had promised himself that he would try to step away from the relentless grind of politics, even if only for a short while. But duty called. With a heavy heart, Trump stood up from the bench and looked down at Hobart, who had followed him to his feet, tail wagging. The dog could sense that something was changing. "I have to go, buddy," Trump said, his voice softer than usual. "But don't worry, I won't be gone long. You've got a home with me, and that's never changing." Hobart looked up at him, those soulful eyes filled with an understanding beyond his years. It was as if the dog knew that Trump was about to leave, but he trusted that the president would return. When Trump arrived back in Washington, D.C., the weight of the world seemed to press down on him once more. The constant hum of reporters, the protests outside the White House, the never-ending political maneuvering, it was all back. But now with Hobart waiting for him at home, Trump felt like he had something to return to. The dog had become his anchor, the one thing that remained constant in a world filled with unpredictability. The White House was buzzing with activity as Trump entered. The situation Pence had referred to was more pressing than anyone had expected. There were talks of unrest abroad, tensions rising with foreign powers, and new challenges in Congress. But through it all, Trump couldn't shake the feeling that his true battle wasn't out there in the political arena. It was within. After a long day of meetings, briefings, and political wrangling, Trump finally returned to his residence at the White House. The moment he stepped inside, Hobart greeted him, wagging his tail enthusiastically. It was as if the dog had been waiting for him all day, knowing exactly when to expect his return. Trump knelt down, his exhaustion momentarily forgotten, as he scratched the dog behind the ears. "You're the best, Hobart," he whispered, a smile spreading across his face. In that moment, the political chaos seemed to fade into the background. Trump wasn't the president of the United States anymore. He was just a man with his dog by his side. In the days that followed, Hobart continued to be Trump's constant companion. The dog was more than just a pet now. He was a symbol of the peace Trump was striving to find within himself. The media continued to follow their every move, fascinated by the unlikely duo. Trump's popularity surged as people saw this softer, more relatable side of him. But Trump wasn't doing it for the attention. He didn't care about the headlines or the Twitter likes. What mattered was the quiet moments, moments of connection, moments of loyalty that he shared with Hobart. In a world full of noise and conflict, the dog was his reminder of what really mattered. Trump's bond with Hobart wasn't just about companionship. It was a lesson in loyalty, something that had often been hard for him to trust in the world of politics. As he spent more time with the dog, he realized that loyalty wasn't always about power or influence. It was about unconditional trust. something that Hobart gave him every day. One evening, as Trump sat on the balcony of the White House, Hobart curled up at his feet. The president looked out over the city of Washington, D.C., his mind at ease. For the first time in a long while, he wasn't thinking about the next election, the next speech, or the next crisis. He was simply living in the moment, with his loyal companion by his side. "I don't know where this journey will take us, Hobart," Trump said, gazing into the horizon. "But I do know one thing. You've taught me more than I could have imagined." And in that moment, with the dog by his side, Trump felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. Donald Trump sat in the Oval Office, his hands resting on the desk before him, but his mind was elsewhere. Outside, the sun was setting over Washington, D.C., casting an orange hue over the city. The windows were slightly open, and the sounds of the bustling city filtered in. Honking cars, distant chatter, the rhythmic click of heels on pavement. But Trump was no longer focused on the clamor of the city. His thoughts kept returning to Hobart, his loyal dog, waiting for him back at the White House. The dog had become more than just a companion. He had become a grounding force, a reminder of simplicity and loyalty in a world that had become increasingly complex. But today was different. Something was off. The air in the White House felt heavy, almost suffocating. Trump couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking beneath the surface, something that he couldn't quite see but felt nonetheless. And it wasn't just the political pressures or the news cycle. No, this was something deeper, something darker. The first signs of trouble had come earlier in the day. Trump had been meeting with his closest advisors, discussing strategies for upcoming international negotiations. Everything seemed fine until Mike Pence, his former vice president, had entered the room. Pence, who had been one of Trump's most loyal allies, was unusually pale. His face, normally stoic and reserved, looked strained. "Mr. President," Pence had started, his voice low, almost hesitant, "there's been a development you need to be aware of." Trump's brow furrowed. He had seen Pence in many situations, but never like this. The gravity in his tone sent a chill down Trump's spine. "What is it?" Trump had asked, his voice sharp. "There's a threat," Pence had replied, choosing his words carefully. "It's coming from outside the country, but it's personal. Someone has been watching you, watching your every move, and we believe it's connected to the people who've been targeting your administration for years." Trump had felt a surge of unease. He wasn't unfamiliar with enemies, both in and outside of Washington. But this felt different. This was something more than political rivals. This was something personal, something that might even involve Hobart, his dog. The idea of anyone targeting his loyal companion made his blood run cold. Hours after his conversation with Pence, Trump received a mysterious call in the late evening. The number was blocked, but something about it made him answer. It was a decision he would soon regret. "Mr. President, I suggest you listen closely," a distorted voice on the other end of the line said, sending a chill down Trump's spine. "Your little dog, Hobart, is in danger. You've been a fool to think you're untouchable. Your enemies are always watching, always waiting." Trump's hand tightened around the phone, his pulse quickening. He glanced over at Hobart, who was curled up on the couch in the corner of the room, oblivious to the conversation. Trump's protective instincts surged. No one threatened his dog. "What do you want?" Trump growled, his voice low and dangerous. "I want you to understand that this is just the beginning," the voice replied, its tone unnervingly calm. "You've made enemies in every corner of the world, and now you're going to feel the consequences. Your dog is just a reminder that no one is safe." Before Trump could respond, the line went dead. His grip on the phone tightened, his mind racing with possibilities. Who could be behind this? And how did they know about Hobart? Trump had never been one to show fear. In his years as a businessman, reality TV star, and president, he had faced enemies from all sides. But this was different. This wasn't just a political threat or a smear campaign. This was personal. Hobart had become more than just a dog to him. He was a symbol of the peace Trump had worked so hard to find, the one thing that kept him grounded. And now someone was threatening that peace. The next morning, as Trump stepped into the hallway of the White House, the weight of the previous night's conversation hung over him like a dark cloud. He had told himself not to let fear control him, But the thought of Hobart being in danger gnawed at him. He had to find out who was behind this and why they were targeting him in such a personal way. But there was no time to waste. The phone call had been a warning, but it had also given him the motivation he needed. He wasn't going to sit back and let this unknown enemy control his life. Trump was determined to find out who was behind the threat, no matter what it took. Trump gathered his team, Pence, his security chief, and his closest advisors into the Situation Room. The tension in the room was palpable as everyone took their seats, eyes focused on the man who had once been the most powerful leader in the world. But now there was a new fire in his eyes, a determination that hadn't been seen in months. "We have to act quickly," Trump said, his voice commanding. "Whoever is behind this threat is getting bolder. They've made it personal, and I'm not going to sit back and let them harm Hobart or anyone else close to me." Pence, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, nodded in agreement. "We've traced some of the communications, Mr. President. It looks like someone from outside the U.S. has been tracking your movements. We're still working to identify them, but we believe they have connections to some of the extremist groups that have been targeting you for years." Trump's jaw tightened. He had never been one to shy away from a fight, but now it wasn't just about political opponents. This was something more sinister. As Trump and his team dove deeper into the investigation, they uncovered something that sent shockwaves through the White House. The mysterious voice from the phone call had been right about one thing. The threat was personal, but it wasn't just about Hobart. It was about everything Trump had ever stood for. The enemies who had been watching him for years were now coming for everything he held dear: his legacy, his family, his sense of security. And as the investigation continued, Trump began to realize something else. The enemies closing in on him were no longer just political figures or international rivals. They were hidden in the shadows, working from the inside, using tactics so sophisticated that even his security team was struggling to keep up. It was a web of conspiracy, one that had been building for years. Late one night, after hours of investigation, Trump was called into the Situation Room again. The news was unsettling. One of his own team members had been compromised. There was a mole in his administration, someone who had been feeding information to his enemies. Panic surged through Trump as the realization hit him. The threat wasn't just coming from the outside world, it was from within. The atmosphere in the White House was tense. Donald Trump stood in the Situation Room, his mind racing as the reality of the mole within his administration began to sink in. He had always known that enemies lurked both inside and outside the government, but to have someone so close to him betray him? It was unthinkable. He was a master at reading people, a skill that had served him well throughout his life. But this was different. The betrayal had been so subtle, so well hidden, that it had taken his most trusted aides weeks to uncover it. The mole, they learned, had been feeding sensitive information to external enemies for months. Whoever they were, they had access to some of the highest levels of the government, and now they were playing a dangerous game. The team had worked tirelessly to uncover the mole's identity. Every conversation, every email, every security breach was being scrutinized. But then, late one night, as the investigation hit a dead end, Trump received an unexpected call. It was from Melania, his wife, a voice that had always been a source of calm and reason in the chaos of his life. "Donald?" Melania's voice cracked through the line. "It's about Hobart." Trump's heart skipped a beat. He could hear the concern in her voice, the worry that only a loved one could convey. Hobart, the loyal dog who had become his emotional anchor, had always been by his side. But now something was wrong. Trump's mind raced as he tried to steady his breathing. "What happened to him?" Trump demanded, his voice sharp with concern. "Someone tried to take him," Melania replied, her voice trembling. "They were on the grounds of the White House. I saw them through the security cameras." Trump's blood ran cold. His first thought was that this was just another threat, part of the broader conspiracy that was tightening its grip on him. But this was personal. Hobart, the dog who had been his loyal companion through thick and thin, was now in the crosshairs. Whoever had targeted Hobart was no longer just going after him. They were going after everything he loved. Trump didn't waste any time. He immediately called for a meeting with his most trusted security team. As he entered the Situation Room, his mind was laser-focused on one thing: protecting Hobart. There was no way he was going to let anyone hurt his dog. But more than that, he couldn't afford to show weakness. Hobart was a symbol of strength, of loyalty, and if they attacked him, it was a direct assault on Trump's legacy, on everything he had fought for. "We need to tighten security," Trump said firmly as he took his seat at the head of the table. "I want every inch of the White House monitored, every entry point checked, and I want every team member to report any suspicious activity immediately." The head of his security team, General Mark Green, nodded. "We've already beefed up security, Mr. President, but with the mole in our ranks, we can't be sure who we can trust. We're doing everything we can to find out who's behind this." "Find them," Trump demanded, his voice unwavering. "I want them exposed. We're not just fighting for this country anymore. We're fighting for everything I've built, and for Hobart. I won't let anyone take him from me." The next few days were a blur of activity. Trump barely slept, his focus solely on the security of the White House and his beloved dog. But despite all the precautions, Hobart was nowhere to be found. His disappearance was as sudden as it was mysterious. The security footage was unclear. Blurry images, shadows moving too quickly for identification. But one thing was certain: someone had orchestrated this. The thought that someone had infiltrated the White House so easily gnawed at Trump. He was the President of the United States, a man who had fought through decades of adversity to get to this point. But now it seemed like the walls were closing in on him. This wasn't just a fight for political survival, it was a battle for his very peace of mind. Hobart wasn't just a pet, he was his protector, his constant, and now that was being ripped away from him. Desperation began to set in. Trump's every waking moment was consumed by the search for Hobart. Every lead turned into a dead end. His security team scoured every corner of the White House, combed through hours of footage, and questioned every staff member. Yet it was as if Hobart had vanished into thin air. Then, just as Trump was about to lose hope, a breakthrough came. The head of security, General Green, burst into the room, his face grim but determined. "We found something, sir," Green said, his voice tight with urgency. "It's a lead, but it's risky. We traced a series of encrypted messages that were sent from an unknown location, but we believe it's connected to someone inside the building. It's like they're trying to keep Hobart hidden from us." Trump felt a surge of anger and determination. "Where is he?" Trump demanded. "We're not sure yet," Green replied, "but we believe the mole has him. The good news is we're closing in. We're using the encrypted messages to track the location." Trump didn't hesitate. "Prepare a team. We're going to get Hobart back." Trump, accompanied by his security detail, set out immediately. The search led them through the underground corridors of the White House, areas that were rarely seen by anyone outside of high-level security. They moved quickly, the urgency of the situation driving them forward. Trump's mind raced with thoughts of Hobart. What if the dog was hurt? What if the person behind this was trying to send a message, not just to him, but to everyone who had supported him? Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they arrived at a small, hidden room in the bowels of the White House. The door was slightly ajar, and Trump could hear muffled noises from within. His heart raced as he pushed open the door, hoping against hope that Hobart was safe. But what he saw inside shocked him. Hobart was sitting in the corner of the room, looking confused but otherwise unharmed. But standing over him, watching intently, was none other than Mike Pence. Trump's breath caught in his throat. "Pence!" he shouted, his voice rising with fury. "What the hell is going on here?" Mike Pence's face was ashen, his eyes wide with fear. "Donald, I never meant for this to happen." The words felt like a punch to Trump's gut. The betrayal was unimaginable. Pence, the man who had stood by him through thick and thin, the man who had once been his closest ally, was the one who had been behind the plot all along. "I had no choice," Pence continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "They promised me power. They promised me everything. They said they'd destroy you, that they'd tear you down if I didn't help them. I never wanted to hurt you, Donald. But I couldn't." Trump's rage boiled over. "You think this is about power," he roared. "This is about loyalty. You betrayed me, and you betrayed Hobart. You put him in danger." Hobart, sensing the tension, stood up and walked over to Trump. His presence, so simple and yet so profound, seemed to calm the storm raging inside Trump. The dog's eyes, filled with trust and loyalty, reminded him of everything he had fought for. The sun had set over Washington, D.C., casting long shadows over the White House grounds. The day had been full of turmoil, secrets unraveled, and trust broken. Donald Trump stood in the Oval Office, looking out the windows that framed the grand lawn, his mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. The betrayal by Mike Pence still stung. But more than that, Hobart's loyalty had become a symbol of something far bigger than just a dog. He represented everything Trump had fought for: loyalty, love, and an unshakable bond that even the most devastating betrayal couldn't break. Trump turned away from the window, his eyes focusing on Hobart, who was peacefully lying by the door, his head resting on his paws, as if oblivious to the chaos that had engulfed their world. It was that simple, unspoken bond with Hobart that kept Trump grounded. He had been through battles before, political and personal, but the presence of his loyal dog somehow made everything seem bearable. But now he had a choice to make. Pence's betrayal wasn't just an act of personal disloyalty, it was part of something larger. He had learned that Pence's dealings weren't confined to Washington, D.C. alone. No, Pence was working with a shadowy group, one that had ties to both foreign and domestic players. The conspiracy was bigger than Trump had ever imagined. Trump paced the Oval Office, his mind racing. He was a man who had lived a life of risks, one that had demanded hard decisions. But this was different. It wasn't just a matter of winning another political battle. This time, it was a matter of survival, not just for him, but for everything he had worked for: the legacy, the nation, and now the safety of Hobart, his loyal companion. The phone on his desk buzzed. He picked it up, his hand slightly trembling, not from fear, but from the weight of what he was about to do. "Mr. President," a voice crackled through the line. It was General Green, his trusted head of security. "We've tracked the group that's been behind this. They're planning something big, a strike, something that will devastate your presidency. You need to move fast." Trump's mind raced. This was it, the final showdown. It was no longer just about Hobart or the betrayal from Pence. It was about protecting the future of the country he had worked so hard to shape. "Get the team together," Trump said firmly. "We're not just going to stop them. We're going to expose them." The next hours were a blur of military strategy, intelligence briefings, and coordination. Trump was in his element. The man who had once thrived on the chaos of the business world, who had lived through the controversies of his presidency, was now about to enter the most intense battle of his life. He wasn't just fighting for his political future, he was fighting for the truth, for his supporters, and for Hobart, who had been with him every step of the way. The plan was set. Trump would lead a covert operation to infiltrate the secret group, destroy their network, and expose the dark forces threatening not only his presidency, but the very foundation of the United States. General Green briefed Trump on the logistics while his team of highly trained specialists prepared for action. But there was one more piece of the puzzle that Trump had to put in place before the operation could begin. "Hobart," Trump said, his voice low and determined. The dog looked up from his resting spot, sensing the seriousness in Trump's tone. Hobart had been with him through every high and low, and now he would be by his side during the most critical moment of Trump's career. Despite all that had happened, Hobart was more than just a pet. He was a symbol of strength, loyalty, and an unwavering sense of duty. Trump walked over to Hobart, kneeling down beside him. "You've been with me through it all, buddy," Trump said softly, scratching the dog behind his ears. "But this is bigger than us. This is for the future of this country, for everyone who believes in what we stand for. We're going to need each other more than ever." Hobart wagged his tail, as if understanding the gravity of the situation. In that moment, Trump felt a deep sense of gratitude. He had always been a fighter, but Hobart's presence grounded him, reminded him of the true power of loyalty and trust. The operation was set in motion. In the dead of night, Trump and his team infiltrated the compound where the shadow group had set up operations. Their faces were obscured by tactical gear, their movements swift and silent. There was no room for hesitation. This was a race against time, and failure wasn't an option. As they moved through the building, Trump's thoughts kept returning to Pence. The man who had once been his most trusted ally was now part of something so corrupt, so deeply entrenched in betrayal, that it almost seemed beyond redemption. But Trump wasn't here for vengeance. He was here to bring the truth to light, to protect the country he loved, and to ensure that the forces of darkness would not triumph. The team reached the inner sanctum of the compound. The leader of the shadow group, a man known only as the Architect, was sitting at a desk surrounded by files, encrypted communications, and maps that plotted out their next steps. He hadn't expected an intrusion, but when he turned to face Trump and his team, his expression hardened. "So, you've come to stop me, Donald?" The Architect's voice was cold, almost amused. "You think you can change anything now?" Trump stepped forward, his presence dominating the room. "I'm not here to change anything. I'm here to end it. This is where it all ends." A tense silence filled the room as Trump and the Architect sized each other up. The Architect smirked, clearly believing that he had already won, but Trump wasn't here to play games. "You think you've won?" Trump asked, his voice calm but filled with authority. "You think you can control this country, control the people? You've underestimated the power of loyalty, the power of truth, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows exactly who you are." Before the Architect could respond, Trump's team moved into action. They swept through the compound, neutralizing any threat in their path, but it was clear that this was a battle of wits, not just firepower. The Architect had his own plans, his own contingency measures, but in the end, it was Hobart who made the difference. The loyal dog, who had been by Trump's side through every trial, rushed into the room at the perfect moment, knocking over the Architect's control panel. The sudden distraction allowed Trump's team to subdue the villain, exposing the shadow group's full operation. With the Architect and his associates captured, Trump stood in the ruins of what had once been a carefully hidden conspiracy. The operation had been a success, and the truth had come to light. The people of the United States would know the full extent of the betrayal, and the shadowy figures who had tried to tear the country apart would no longer be a threat. As the dust settled, Trump turned to Hobart, who stood by his side, tail wagging in triumph. It had been a long road, one full of betrayal, uncertainty, and danger. But in the end, it was the loyalty of his dog that had helped him find the strength to fight through it all. "Good job, buddy," Trump said, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "We did it." Hobart barked as if to say, "Of course we did." As the sun rose over Washington, D.C., Trump and Hobart stood together on the White House lawn. The world was still full of uncertainty, but for the first time in a long while, Trump felt at peace. He had overcome the darkest of betrayals, and with Hobart by his side, he knew that there was no challenge too great to face. In the end, the bond between a man and his dog had proven stronger than the forces that sought to tear them apart. And as Trump gazed out at the horizon, he knew one thing for certain. This was only the beginning. The future was his to shape, and with Hobart by his side, he would continue to fight for everything that mattered. And so, with a final glance at his loyal dog, Trump smiled. "Let's make America great again, Hobart, together." This concludes the story of Donald Trump, Hobart, and the ultimate showdown. Their journey was one of betrayal, loyalty, and the fight for truth. Subscribe Storyboat for more upcoming heartwarming stories.